Hello everybody, welcome to More Chainsaws Needed, where, because I love horror, thrillers and suspense, I am going to talk, rant, rave about, review and recommend movies, TV series and books in those genres for you guys as I draw. Alien is considered one of the most seminal horror movies of all time, or if we are going to be completely honest, one of the most seminal sci-fi horror movies of all times, and with good reasons. The claustrophobic atmosphere created by director Ridley Scott and set designer H.R. Geiger, put together with the amazing script by Dan O'Bannon, who got inspiration of all things from a black comedy sequence he had written previously, and the desire to have an alien in a movie that actually looked like an alien, makes for a movie that had withstood the passage of time, repeated viewings, one excellent sequel, one not so bad sequel, and 4 other movies that we will try to forget for now. While many people see Aliens, directed by John Cameron, as the most memorable of the Alien franchise, and indeed the sequel introduced many of the things that we now see as absolutely integral to the franchise, it was Alien the one who gave the first signal of how horrifying the xenomorphs are. And also started a long discussion that we are still having today about gender, horror, and reproductive rights. So let's rev up our chainsaws, carefully please, as the alien's blood is acid, and let's start dissecting this particular nut. First, we have to get some history out of the way. In 1973, the Supreme Court of the United States passed the landmark decision known as Roe v. Wade. Very long story short, in case you have been living under a rock this year when it was overturned, Roe v. Wade conferred the right for women to have an abortion, should they choose so, and that abortion was legal given that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the country gives everyone a fundamental right to privacy, which in turn protects any woman for looking to terminate a pregnancy, or actually any person for what they look for in medical treatments, but that's a completely different thing from now. And of course, that decision sparked a debate that is still going on, especially now that it's been overturned and many states have made abortion illegal, regarding the rights of a fetus over the rights of a living person. Yes, it gets me really angry even when I do not live in the United States and in my country abortion is legal. In May 25, 1979, Alien premiered to remind everyone why it's important to have bodily autonomy, and more specifically, how terrible it is when your reproductive rights are stripped away from you and you are forced to carry out a pregnancy that you never wanted. And worse. Yes, sorry, I get really angry about this subject. As I said, it was directed by Ridley Scott, with amazing creature and ship designs by legend illustrator H.R. Geiger, and based on a script by Dan O'Bannon. Alien is, as I said before, a seminal horror movie, and I dare to say a seminal movie, period. Right away, it won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects, back when it meant something, 3 Saturn Awards, and the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. Although originally critics didn't seem very pleased with it, it has since earned its place in history with about 7 sequels and prequels of diverse quality. But whatever we say about the sequels, the truth remains that the first one is a masterclass in horror and also a very pointed commentary on reproductive rights and the female experience in a male-dominated field. But before we start dissecting the whys of the movie, hell, the whys of the whole franchise, and why they are very pro-choice, let's do a quick reminder of what the first movie is about. And yes, for this one, we will only talk about the first movie and the canon that was created in it. Every single thing that was added by the sequels and prequels does not exist for this discussion. We will talk about those later when I hit those movies. The tug spaceship Nostromo is coming back to Earth with its 7-member crew in stasis. Well, 8-member crew if we count John C. the Cat, and we should always count John C. the Cat. However, 10 months before arriving to its destination, the computer ship intercepts a strange signal and, believing it to be a distress signal, wakes up the crew in order to investigate its origins. As the ship suffers damage upon landing on the moon where the signal comes from, the engineers Parker and Brett, Warrant Officer Ripley, and Science Officer Ash stay behind for the ship to be repaired, while Captain Dallas, Executive Officer Kane, and Navigator Lambert go outside to find the origin of the signal. While they are outside, Ripley manages to decipher part of the transmission and realizes it's a warning, but can't inform the others as Ash informs her that they lost contact with them when they entered what seemed to be a derelict alien ship, and that by the time she reaches them, they would already know what the warning is for. In the ship, Kane separates from Dallas and Lambert and discovers a chamber with what looks like hundreds of egg-like shaped objects. He stumbles into it, and when he touches one of them, well, he gets to meet up close and personal with one of the creatures we know now as facehuggers, precisely for the way it breaks his helmet and attaches itself to the face completely, leaving him unconscious. Lambert and Dallas find him and carry him to the Nostromo, where Ripley refuses to let them back in on board due to quarantine regulations. Unfortunately, between Captain Dallas and Ash, she is overridden and Ash lets them inside the ship again. The creature is at first impossible to detach from Kane, as it has corrosive acid blood. But after a while, it actually detaches itself when it's not being watched, and not much later is found dead. Kane himself wakes up a bit later, seemingly okay, although with no memory of the encounter, so the crew decides that they can count their losses and go back to Earth with the ship half fixed, just taking one last meal before going into stasis again. A last meal that, let me assure you, no one who has seen the movie will ever forget. Okay, this is the time when some people are going to get angry at me. Alien is a very feminist movie when you start dissecting it. People joke about how the movie is no one listens to the rational woman and thus everyone but her and her cat die, even when actually Jonesy is Dallas's cat, but that's a story for another day. We talk about how Ellen Ripley is the original badass from movies, putting every single future main protagonist from a horror action film up against her as if she was this incredibly trained super soldier despite her being a space trucker in the first movie and the script being originally written without considering a specific gender for any character but Kane, something supported by the fact that originally no character had a name, just a surname, and that has a huge effect on what I am talking about reproductive rights. And gender was only included when the roles were cast with minimal to no change to the original script. And yet, it's very hard to imagine Ripley being anything but a woman, precisely because of scenes like when Captain Dallas and Ash pretty much ignore her completely to let Kane into the ship, despite Ripley being absolutely correct about the quarantine producers, and we get back to the no one listens to the rational woman part. But the feminism of Alien goes far, far from just, hey, let's show a woman who is ready to survive no matter what, and who is the owner of the only brain cell of the ship when confronted with a killer alien being. And a lot of it comes right in the heels of how Americans were starting to understand reproductive rights and abortion debates were going all over the country. There are only 6 years between Roe vs. Wade and the premiere of Alien, and thus, yes, most of the script was written during that time. And let's think precisely of what is the horror of Alien. We're talking about a creature that impregnates the host against their will, grows like a parasite within them. There is a blink and miss it moment where you see the alien growing inside of Kane in a sort of ultrasound picture, just in case anyone missed the parallels, and then burst out of their torso in a shower of guts and blood. And yes, I know that for all of those anti-choice people, the mere idea of calling a fetus a parasite is a non-starter. But here we are not talking about a wanted pregnancy, and besides, formally, a fetus is a parasite. Not all parasites are bad. We're talking about something that was forced on the host, which is precisely why Kane had to be a male. Because then we could have a bit of distance between the metaphor that the xenomorphs are and the reality of pregnancy that wouldn't exist if Kane was a woman. Because if Kane had been a woman, yes, pretty much all of the audience since 1979 would have been screaming to Ash to give Kane an abortion stat. And that's not where the forced reproduction stops in Alien. While the sequels will introduce the queens, here we only had one lone xenomorph, and O'Bannon had a pretty good idea of how such a creature could keep the cycle of life by its own. An idea that makes the chamber that Kane's find at the beginning with the 100 eggs far more terrifying than the concept of queens introduced in Aliens by James Cameron. Remember how in the movie we never find out what happened to Captain Dallas after he's caught by the alien? That they only find his weapon and nothing else? Well, the answer to that little disappearance trick is in a cutscene where Ripley, in the middle of trying to stop the self-destruct commands for the ship, finds both Dallas and Parker's dead body encased each in what seems like a cocoon that sort of starts looking like the eggs Kane found. Parker, of course, is completely gone, and we can barely see his face coming out from the egg, but Dallas is still alive, conscious, and begging to Ripley, or anyone who comes in, we don't even know if he knows that it's Ripley, to kill him. Because see, what is happening to them is that the xenomorph is turning them into eggs to make new face huggers that will in turn make new xenomorphs once they find a host. They are, in essence, being reduced to only wombs, to only reproductive parts. And that is a horror so huge to Dallas, to O'Bannon who wrote the scene, that Dallas can only beg for death. Not for freedom, not for the chance to find a way to reverse the process, just for a quick death. Don't worry if it's not painless as long as it's death. Ripley obliges and burns them both to death. Well, Dallas to death. Parker was already gone. As if the horror of being forced to be a womb for a creature that you didn't want to be implanted in you, and knowing fully well that you will die when said creature is born, wasn't enough, there is a second layer of nastiness that we can also tie to real-life struggles of those fighting for reproductive rights for all that happens in Alien. At first, we could say that Kane is to blame for the situation. After all, why he was poking around the eggs without some extra distance of protection? And yes, that does sound like I am blaming the victim, because it's the exact same argument. Of course we can't blame Kane for sleeping and falling next to the eggs, nor for thinking his space helmet would keep him safe, or for not knowing what would happen if he touched the egg. Of all the alien victims, Kane is the only one we can't blame for what happened to him, as he was the only one who had no idea what was going on. But it still was an accident, right? It could have happened to any member of the away team, and there was absolutely no way the crew could know they were in a terribly dangerous place and leave before something bad happened, right? And while we joke about it, we can't really blame Captain Dallas, Lambert, and Ash from breaking quarantine regulation to try and save their friend, right? I mean, yes, they should have listened to Ripley, but the truth is that such a tight crew is like a family, and when a family member is hurt, we do anything possible to save them no matter what. Except, as the movie goes on, we find out that Ash doesn't have the best interest of the crew in mind, and in fact is not even human. Here, I make a pause for the feminist analysis to geek a bit about the amazing use of foreshadowing O'Bannon used in the script regarding Ash's identity, not just as a robot, but as the mole. It's not just that he doesn't eat, but just drinks what seems to be milk, and later we find out it's like it's fuel. Or a blink and miss it moment where he runs faster than a human could. But even before he lets Kane and the facehugger inside the ship, he starts his betrayal by not allowing Ripley to warn the crew, not even telling her to go and find them because, of course, had he done so, Ripley would have probably told them to leave Kane in the derelict ship or arrive early enough to save him. Which brings us to the real horror of all this. The reason why Ash does all what he does, pretty much helps the alien by not doing absolutely anything useful to help the crew, and thus lets Kane, Parker, and Dallas to be killed? It's because he was programmed to. The whole tragedy was engineered by the company which paid their paychecks because they had gotten the signal before, knew it was a warning, and wanted to get the alien specimen to study as a possible bioweapon. And the lives of the crew? Completely expendable. And how do I connect this to real life? Horribly easy. Because even back in 1979, people were already aware of the predatory capitalist mindset that is permeating every part of our society, where individuals, especially poor and middle-class individuals like the truckers in the Nostromo, are completely expendable as long as the corporation, the rich people of the world, which are less than the 1%, are getting a profit. I mean, there is little difference from letting workers die in an Amazon warehouse due to overwork, not fixing certain safety measures for airplanes to keep a profit even said planes are crashing, and sending a crew of 7 to die so you can get your hands on a weapon that you can sell later. Which also comes back to reproductive rights, believe it or not. Because at the end of the day, one of the reasons why certain companies are fueling money into so-called pro-life groups is precisely to get them to vote for the party that will give them more freedom to keep using us as nothing more than drones to keep making them profit. Crew? Expendable. As the Alien franchise grew, there were changes to the lore, and of course, with new writers and directors, there were also changes to the message each movie brought. But because the one thing that has never changed is the need of a host to let the xenomorphs go from facehuggers to full drones, the underlying metaphor of forced pregnancy is still there in every single Alien movie, comic, and video game ever made. It can happen to everyone: women, men, non-binary people. Sure, only those with a working uterus can get pregnant in real life, but that doesn't mean those without one cannot be empathic or sympathetic to those who have one. But the alien metaphor works incredibly well because xenomorphs don't distinguish between victims. In fact, it's quite telling that in the original, where the drone must create the new eggs themselves, the only victims used for reproduction purposes are men. Women also die, of course, and poor Lambert has probably the most gruesome death after Kane, even if hers is only implied, unless you read the novel, of course. But do you really want to add to the nightmare? So yeah, next time you watch Alien, just try to imagine exactly why the most horrifying thing that can happen to you in space is not that no one will hear you scream, but that you will hear the crying sound of a parasite bursting out of you. I want to thank my dear patrons Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, Jessica, and Ali Riley, as well as my first supporter Tanya Pineda and the most amazing Amy Song, without whom none of my videos would be possible. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, written link on description, as I know my name can be hard to spell. And with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos, as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else, and get the chance to suggest future subjects for videos too. If you can't support me this way, I also accept likes, subscriptions to the channels, comments so that the algorithm catches engagement, and of course, you sharing the links. I will also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. This was Adalisa Zarate, and remember, there is not a problem in the horror genre that cannot be solved with more chainsaws.